no single human being's life has been documented like the Prophet of Allah ﷺ's life has been documented. There is no one in the history of humanity whose life has been documented in this much detail. It is remarkable. It is mind-blowing. But just a few extractions, so much so that it describes the color of the Prophet ﷺ's skin. Everything about him was observed. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أزهر اللون. That he had like a very in between, like a lightly tan type of color, tone of skin. ليس بالأدهم ولا بالأبيض الأمحق. That it's not like he was very dark skinned, nor was he very, very light skinned. He had a very like a medium tone type of skin color. It describes the face, the symmetry of the face of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It describes كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لم يكن. It says أسيل الوجه. The Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very, like he had like a very open, like a broad face. Like his face seemed always very welcoming. And then it says لم يكن مستديرا غاية التدوير. It's not like his face was really round and it was a huge face. بل كان بين الاستدارة والإسالة. But it's almost like he had a very broad, open face, but it was just very welcoming when you looked at his face. He was always very pleasant to look at. It describes the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It even describes his forehead. It describes that the Prophet كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أسيل الجبين. That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's forehead was a little bit larger, and it was very, like, again, it was very open, it was kind of large, he had a large forehead. It describes the eyes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It describes his eyes being شديدتي سواد الحدقة. That the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his pupils, the pupils of his eyes were very, very dark, like almost like black in color. The pupils of his eyes were very dark, nearly like black in color. And it goes on describing literally every single thing about him. And then, of course, obviously, where it describes his physical appearance, it even describes the conduct, the character, the behavior of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he spent his time, how he lived his life. And it describes him mutawasil al-ahzan. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was always grieving one after another, constantly grieving. What was he always grieving about? Over the condition of people. He was always concerned about people. Da'im al-fikra, he was always in thought. He was always in deep thought, thinking about people, thinking about how to help people. لَيْسَتْ لَهُ رَاحَةً. He never had a moment's rest. He never take a break. He was always busy, always going, always busy with something. طَوِيلَ السَّكْتِ. For long periods of time, the Prophet would be quiet. He wasn't just babbling unnecessary. He would just be quiet at times. Very quiet, very serene, very calm and peaceful to be around. وَلَا يَتَكَلَّمْ فِي غَيْرِ حَاجَةٍ. He wouldn't talk unnecessarily. And it goes on describing him and how he would conduct himself, how he would talk to people. When the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would talk to people, he would completely turn himself and face people. He would completely turn himself and face people. He wouldn't talk to people without looking at them. He wouldn't just kind of turn his head and talk to somebody. And it describes when he was sitting, because when you're sitting, it's difficult, right? When you're standing, you just turn. Sitting, it's like, oh, I'm not reading this person, let me just talk to this person. No, he'd get up, he'd turn to the side and face the person and talk to them. And we'd be done, then he'd turn back around. That's how he talked to people. When he would point at someone or something, he wouldn't point like this at someone. That's rude. We used to be told when we were little, don't point at people, it's rude. He would gesture at people with his whole hand. He was always the first one to say salam. Always say salam. When he had to talk to somebody across the room, he wouldn't be like, hey, Ubaidullah, hey, guy. He wouldn't just yell at people across the room like that. It's demeaning. And it's disrespectful a lot of times. And it's just not dignified behavior. He'd walk across the room, walk up to the person, touch the person on the shoulder, and then speak to them face to face, pleasantly, in a pleasant tone. He would introduce himself when he would meet people. He would say salam, he'd introduce himself. He'd ask him, what's your name? Where are you from? Just be like, hey, you, I need you to do this. No. What's your name? Assalamu alaikum. What's your name? Where are you from? How's everything? And then he'd get to business. Just these little things. How he walked, how he talked. Everything about him has been preserved. So no human being's life has been documented in as much detail as the life of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that in and of itself is just a beautiful thing.